Hey, so welcome everyone to this third edition of the Scrumptious Facilitators webinar. The first one was hosted by my colleague Sjoerd about evidence-based management. The second one was also hosted by me, which was about remote sprint reviews. And this time we're going to talk about tips for user stories and backlog management. Before I start talking about that, a really brief introduction about Scrum Facilitators if you're not yet familiar with us. So we're Scrum Facilitators. We're a bunch of individual Scrum fanatics, Agile fanatics. Most of them, except for me, are also PST, so professional Scrum trainers. Zerian, who's also in the call, recently became PST. So now all the pressure is on me because I'm the last one remaining who is not a PST, but I am within Scrum Facilitators training the PSPO and the PSPOA course because I'm a passionate product owner. That's my area of expertise. And with the five of us, and now even internationally, because Steve Traps and Andy Hiles from the UK also joined us, we all have our own expertise. So, for example, some of us focus on Scrum Mastery, some on Agile leadership. And that means that altogether we teach all the official Scrum.org courses from Scrum Facilitators. The reason that we set up this webinar is that we noticed that there's from the practice in which we are all still working. So we're all working as a Scrum Master or as a product owner in organizations. We run into very practical cases that are interesting to share and to exchange ideas about. So that's how this idea came up for the webinar. And hopefully through this way you get to know us as a brand and you know what we can also offer you in case you're interested to take a next step in your learning path. So that about Scrum Facilitators. More from a practical side, Zerian is here to help me a little bit. So if you have any questions, paste them in the chat. We try to do the questions at the end of the session because it's a really brief session. So I first do my story and then we see how much time there's left for the questions. So I hope you understand that, but if there's time left at the end of the session, we always try to answer any questions that were there during the session. If possible, just turn your camera on. If not possible, no worries, but we like to see your faces and to also see who's joining. I hope you have some tasty lunch and that you just enjoy this talk while you're eating your lunch. So enjoy, I would say. Zerian, anything to add?
No.
Cool.
Looking forward to it.
So we are going to talk about user stories and product backlog management. For the more experienced product owners, maybe it's like by now basic stuff. But if I reflect on my own product owner role, it's basic stuff that keeps relevant at any time, and it's always handy to, retrospect how are you applying these kind of practices in your role. So hopefully also for the experienced product owners, it can be interesting to listen to this talk. And if you're not familiar yet, then this can maybe be a good starter to start learning about user stories and product backlog management. And the first question that I would like to ask you to answer, you can just paste your answer in the chat. Who was the first actually to publish a book that coined user stories? Which of these three? Was that Ken Beck, Mike Cohn, or Jeff Patton?
See a lot of B.
A lot of B, C.
C's.
That's interesting. I don't see an A because it was actually Ken Beck. It's not so well known. It was Ken Beck who, in his book Extreme Programming Explained from 1999, I was still in high school in that year. he already wrote about user stories in a very basic sense. It was like about writing the wishes of the user on a card, right? So that's how it started. And then with the publication of Mike Cohn in 2004 in User Stories Applied, it became more wider known as a practice that can help. And then Jeff Patton in 2014, a decade later, added user story mapping upon that, which is a practice to explore products or features in the journey of the user using the user story format as well. So we applied some kind of way of working framework practice upon the known principle of user stories. But basically, you can say that these three people had a big role in the popularity of user stories. So going back to the basics of a user story, it's really simple, right? So you, from the perspective of a user, you clearly describe what that user wants to be able to do with your product or service, and what the result would be for that specific user in that specific case. So in this example, we see a police officer. He wants to have a pair of handcuffs so that he can catch the bad guy and put him in prison. Or also, if you look at it in a template form, as a type of user, I want some kind of goal so that I can accomplish something, some kind of reason why I would like to be able to do that. So that's a really the basic of a user story. So it's really something that applies to something that a specific end user of your product wants to do. A bit later, I will also talk about when not to use a user story, because sometimes we use user stories a little bit too much. So first of all, about how to write a good user story. You might be familiar with the INVEST acronym. I still love it because it's a good guideline to check for your user stories if they are of a good quality. So the I of INVEST stands for independent. Can the work be delivered by itself without having other backlog items that also need to move to done before the user can actually use that specific solution or feature? So then negotiable. Is it clear why we are actually making this user story? And is the how and not open for discussion? So for example, as a product owner, if you already write what kind of database the team should use, you are narrowing down the solution way too much so that the real innovation that normally comes out of your Scrum team cannot happen anymore. So it should be negotiable so that within the time that's also available, the Scrum team can find a solution to actually deliver the user story. Then, of course, the V stands for valuable. Is the value to be delivered to the stakeholders clear? Value is always an interesting topic, and often actually Scrum teams don't really understand that. So do a really good check with your team. Do we have a good understanding of why, what's the purpose of this specific feature? And also, how can we actually measure if that value is there in the end? That's also a good question to ask. Then can we estimate the effort? There's no rule from Scrum on how you should estimate, but Scrum says you should at least be able to estimate your product backlog items so that you can predict somehow a forecast of when a certain milestone can be achieved. You can use story points, you can use story counting. That's what I these days do a lot with my teams. Any way of being able to estimate in some sense when you can achieve something. And then, yeah, in my experience, really important is that if you really want to work with user stories, so working on something that when it's finished can be shipped as a feature towards your customers, it should be small, because else it will become really big and it will span multiple sprints. And generally, you try to define a user story that can be finished within 1 or maybe sometimes 2 sprints, but no more than that. And then in the end, it's a testable, is clearly described what the feature should do, so that we can also in the end check if it's working as we expect how it should work. So those were like the general tips that come with the INVEST acronym. I also have 4 tips from my own experience for you. 4 tips of things that I see when working with user stories that are important. So, well, it's actually really obvious, but often we forget about it. It's a user story. So how do you define a good user story? First of all, by knowing the user. So pick up the phone, call some customers, and check if that user story or that feature or solution that you have in mind really brings value to a problem that's worth solving for your user. Then the second one is, again, about the size. So often we notice that when you really want to define a user story that ships something functional when it's done towards the end user, it often already becomes really big and spans multiple sprints before it can be finished. So a user story should be very concise, very narrow, so that you can finish it rapidly and validate the value of it fast by shipping a increment to your end users. So if it's too big, start slicing. And if you start slicing, then of course, remember to slice the pie vertically and not horizontally, so that you really have something that can be shipped to the user at the end of the sprint. Because if you only have a database, that is not something that you can bring to your end user, right? So make sure that you slice it in the right way. There's a lot of blog posts and literature on how you should slice, because it's a profession in itself, I think. And then coming up with the best user stories is not an individual effort. I think it's really a team effort. In my team, I work with UXers, proposition marketeers, and almost always they have some ideas that I didn't have as a product owner, right? So always try to involve the team from the start and try to make those user stories together. And then I also mentioned it already in the previous slide. Define how to learn from the start, because in the end we ship those user stories to be able to apply the empirical process control, to learn if our assumptions are true. So it really helps if, when you are already refining the user stories, that you also write down how can we actually measure if the value is in the end there when we ship this to the end user. So we're talking about user stories right now. So is everything then a user story? Let's go back to the Scrum Guide. What does the Scrum Guide say about user stories? Well, you might know that the Scrum Guide actually doesn't say anything about user stories. It talks about an ordered list of what is needed to improve the product. It is the single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team. Okay, so a user story is a shape of a product backlog item. That's it, right? So sometimes we fall into the pitfall of, I also did this in the past. I worked with a pretty technical team. We made API solutions. And then you got these kind of stories that said, as a developer, I want to be able to patch this endpoint so that I can patch it. Well, that doesn't bring any value, right? Then you basically can make a technical task in your product backlog that says add patch endpoint, and that's it. So a pitfall that we often fall into is to think that we have to describe everything as a user story. I think the power of user stories becomes bigger when you only apply it, when you really bring something of value to your end user. And all the other things in your product backlog that are related maybe to automated testing and these kind of things, just formulate them in a different and easier to understand way. So now we're going to shift a bit more to the broader aspect, being product backlog management. I would like to ask you, which of these pictures, you can paste your answer again in the chat, which of these pictures reflects the state of your current product backlog? Is it A, wow, it's everything is shiny and like everything is, it's almost magic what's happening there. You have a fully described backlog that's really clean. Is it B, it looks really neat, but if you open some cabinets in the kitchen, then there is still some mess? Or is it C, it's big chaos in your product backlog and it needs some cleaning up, or a lot of cleaning up? Just paste your answer in the chat. Curious how it looks.
Yeah, there are people being honest, B, C. Yeah, being very open about the state of the product backlog.
Oh, somewhere in between A and B, B to C. Now I'm going to surprise you a little bit. I'm actually most happy when I'm in B. And I'll explain why. There's another pitfall with backlog management. That's that you over-engineer your product backlog, right? So in this, in picture A, it's like a magic kitchen, right? Every cabinet is like, ta-da, it's clean, it's tidy, everything is in place. But the chance is also really high that you have a piece of waste in the efforts that you did, because some of these cabinets or the oven you'll never use, and you put a lot of effort in making that really shiny. So the truth is always a little bit in the middle. Of course, it shouldn't be one big messy thing like picture C. But if there's one cabinet of all these cabinets that still has some mess inside, that's okay. You'll start refining it at a point that it becomes valuable enough to refine it, right? So there's no rule, of course. It's not bad if you're in A or if you're in C, but just maybe for some inspiration, try to find the B spot. So also for product backlogs, there's an acronym. It's called the DEEP acronym. You might know it. The D stands for detailed, the E for estimated, the other E for emergent, and the P for prioritized. The detailed, important to say, it should be detailed appropriately, right? So the items on the top should be detailed a lot, like the B picture I just showed. The items at the bottom shouldn't be described in a lot of detail already, because you might decide never to pick them up. Estimated speaks for itself. Emergent basically means that it keeps changing. So you make a backlog, it's not like the end station, like an old-fashioned project plan. It will change every day. And prioritize means that the item on the top of the product backlog is the one that you will start working on first. Now you see in the title that I added a S. So a product backlog is deeps. So what I see often happening is that the product backlog becomes some kind of, well, collector's place to basically store every idea that comes your way as a product owner. And that's really a pitfall, because everything that lands in the product backlog will require time of the team to do something with it. Even throwing away is time that it takes during some kind of refinement. So if you store everything in your product backlog will become less transparent for stakeholders, because there's so much in it, they don't understand it anymore. And it costs more time for you and for your team to maintain it. So really try to keep your product backlog very, very short. That's the additional tip that I have with the DEEPS acronym. Yes, so emergent also means not changing the backlog, but also deleting items from your product backlog. So, and then the last slide, and then we can go to a Q&A. We'll have plenty of time for the questions that are asked. So I think that's really nice. Often I get the question when I'm in the product owner training, hey Kai, but how do I know? When is my backlog? When is it okay? Because you can have a poor backlog, but you can also have a gold-plated backlog. And that's also, as I explained, a form of waste. So you should be somewhere in the middle. And what I always advise is then to have some measures in place, or be aware of things that you can monitor to keep measuring if you're in the right balance. So the B picture of the question that I asked. So in order of priority, in my mind, that this is not a rule or something described in the Scrum Guide. This is just based on my own experience. The most important one is user data and feedback, right? If you see that you're building the wrong things, then probably you're also not refining your backlog well enough, because you're defining the wrong things on your product backlog. So if you see on user data and feedback that, for example, your customer satisfaction is going down, you might be doing the wrong stuff. So that's at least an indicator that can make you inspect, hey, how are we actually making things arrive on the product backlog, and how are we refining them? Then there's stakeholder feedback. So if your stakeholders are all angry at the sprint review and they shout like, hey, what are you doing? This is not what we agreed upon. Then probably in the process of refining your backlog items and including your stakeholders in that process, something is going wrong. Then there's, of course, feedback from the team themselves, which generally pops up in the retrospective or at the coffee machine. Then another one is, are you achieving your sprint goals? I think the sprint goals are a really important element within Scrum that can help you monitor the quality of your product backlog, because if you're never meeting your sprint goals, then the team doesn't understand the work good enough at the start when you agree upon the sprint goal, right? So then it's basically a sign to start refining a bit better, so that when you define the sprint goal, you have a better understanding of the work it takes to actually achieve that goal. You can have a look at average cycle time. So if the cycle time is really, really long of every backlog item, then probably there's also some unclarity there, or something that is going wrong in the refinement process. Number of impediments. And the last one, also one of my favorites, it's called the newbie check. Whenever you have a new team member, just drop the product backlog on his plate, on her plate, and ask them, hey, what are we building the coming time? And if that's kind of resonates with you're planning to build, then probably the backlog is quite understandable. But often you'll see a big question mark or someone who is fresh in on the first day. And then you might also work a little bit more on making at least the top backlog items more clear, so that someone without any knowledge can digest and get up to speed pretty quickly. So that was it. It was really fast, really a lunch-size update on user stories and backlog management. I hope it helps a bit. We have some time for a Q&A before we go there. If you like to dive into this more, I'm trying to go to the next slide, but somehow yes, there it is. We have a couple of options for you to dive into these kind of topics a bit more. First one is our free Slack community. Every participant of a Scrum Facilitators meetup is invited to join our Slack community. You can scan the QR code now, or in the slides that are shared on the meetup page, there will be some information on how you can join. Or of course, you could decide to join one of our product owner classes. The next ones are on 1st and 2nd of July, we have our PSPO, or Professional Product Owner Training. It's a virtual one still in English. And 5 and 6 September, we run our next Product Owner Advanced class, which is in Dutch. And the first one, woohoo, physically again. So we hope, if everything stays as it's going with COVID right now, that we can also start doing physical trainings again, which we really love, because then we connect even better with participants. However, we also do get some requests for the Product Owner Advanced training to do it in English at the moment. So if you're English speaking, and we might even organize that one virtually, if you're English speaking and not really close to Utrecht or another place in the Netherlands, feel free to contact us and we can always have a look. So we would be very delighted to see you in any of our future classes. And else, I hope that this talk helped you make a tiny step forwards again. Yeah, and then we have some time for a short Q&A. So, Celia, what kind of questions do you see popping up? And then I'll close my slide so that we can see each other better. Is there any questions, Celia, that you think are standing out, or that you see multiple times?
No, there isn't any question as of now.
Okay. I didn't see a lot of things popping up in the chat, but I think that's just people talking with each other then.
And thanking us and thanking you.
Oh.
If it's okay to join the Slack community, yes, it is.
Very okay. Yes.
Yeah. What's maybe good to know is if you.
Eric has a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
That's two Erics. The other Eric was before me.
That one was Martijn, I think.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure what happened there in my head. Yeah, my question. One of the things I always wrestle with my teams is during backlog refinement, we're working out a story, and it's unclear. And then what I usually do is I ask someone in the team to basically take responsibility for the story and work it out, gather information, make it so that in the next refinement that we can actually estimate it and pick it up in the team. But as my teams mature, I notice that they basically they get more self-confident, and then suddenly they do that kind of research during the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
So I was interested in finding out what you think about that, about the balance between those two.
Yeah, I think it would be best to refer back to the slide with the metrics, right? So if the metrics are all on a green light, generally, then that's fine. So I'm not a fan of a definition of ready, because it forces you on bureaucratic stuff. Well, it might not be necessary because the team is very mature. So it's fantastic if they're able to do that, because the later you do specifications, the lower the risk of waste in your process, right? So on the other side, if you see that the sprint goals are not being met, that the customers write bad reviews about your product, that the stakeholders are unhappy, then you might signal this, help the team make that transparent, and then have a chat. Okay, maybe we have to refine a little bit more on forward, because apparently we're doing the wrong stuff here.
I think Martijn also has a question, which is too long to type. Go. Oh, you're typing it. You can also unmute
You
it.
can unmute, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, but it's a really long story. I'm trying to write it down compactly and precisely. I'm almost done.
Okay, then in that case, let's go to another question. Let's see. Noel says, so actually, a user story is not applicable for researchers and bugs. How do I manage these on the backlog?
Yeah, I think just put them on the backlog if it's important and you want to prioritize it. Only the advice is not to write it in a user story format when it's not a user story, right? So if it's a bug, fix the database, just write fix the database, because that's way easier to understand for the one picking that one up than when you write, as a developer, I want a working database so that my product works again. Right, and you have like this sentence that if you use online tools like Jira, doesn't even fit in the field, so that half is cut off, and then you have to open the issue again. So just for the sake of digesting that issue as easy as possible, I would just cut the crap and just write down what it is.
Thank you so much, and Jason, thanks for being here. The other question that we have, maybe. Before we go to a question of Martijn, is from Bob. Any tips on how to handle a situation where a team has multiple products and stakeholders? For example, when maintaining the backlog.
Mm-hmm. So that's usually about priorities, right? So if you have multiple products and multiple stakeholders, you probably need to find some clever way to make those stakeholders agree on the priority in your product backlog. And stakeholder from product A wants everything from product A on the top, and the stakeholder of product B wants everything from product B. So in my experience, organizing some kind of group effort with those stakeholders interacting with each other helps. So don't address this with each stakeholder for each product individually, but try to make that a group effort. That's one. And then make the value or the potential, the unrealized value, as transparent as possible, so that the stakeholder of product A, despite wanting product A to move forward, also grows a understanding of why product B might be more important at this point.
Yeah, it's about, as a product owner, connecting those stakeholders, right? Instead of being the middle person. Okay, so.
And probably there's plenty more tips about it. So if other people have tips on this question.
Yeah, it's a rather large subject, but thanks for this bit of tip.
You're welcome.
Question from Chris. Any suggestions on technical debt issues? Separate them from feature issues?
Might need some clarification.
Yeah, please.
So I've seen we have a lot of technical debt issues, things added by developers. Oftentimes they see, and well, I'm not a product owner, actually Scrum Master here sitting in for the product owner. But a lot of those, well, don't really get addressed quite often, and they do clutter the backlog quite a bit. Is there a reasonable way how to make it clear that those are there and to keep the backlog a bit readable again?
So if I understand your question correctly, is about how should you combine technical debt with the regular features that you want to develop with your teams? Yeah. That's really simple. The backlog is prioritized based on what the product owner deems most valuable. So everything is in the product backlog, also technical debt stuff. I mean, there's political things how to deal with technical debt. That's basically not put a separate item on your backlog, but incorporate it in some kind of business item. That's often it's if it requires a really big effort. So imagine that a team needs to spend multiple sprints on removing a piece of technical debt. Then it's easier to sell it when you combine it with some kind of step for the business or the user that you take with that effort. So that's just a very practical political tip on how to deal with it. But basically, to go back to Scrum, you all add it to the product backlog. And then again, for the technical debt, don't write it in the user story format, because that it's not something for the user. It's something to guarantee a good continuation of your product over the long run, right? So it's more a technical kind of issue in your backlog.
Yep, great, thanks.
Have you tried making the technical debt also more visible where it's connected to? Something that I've tried in the past is basically tagging the technical debt. Also, that whenever you create a new story or a new feature, you can tag technical debt that is related to it. And then while discussing a new feature or a new story, you can also link it directly to some part of technical debt and maybe take some of that part in the development of the new feature. So basically, yeah, a little bit of a forced Boy Scout rule, but at least you develop something else that you try to clean up some of the mess as well in the same go.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, we try to do it a bit with epics. We work with Jira, so then you kind of see it all in one epic, and you can address them a bit in one go. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeroen. That's
Very
very,
good,
very
because you
practical
can get
tip
a
as
lot
well.
of administrative work out of it as well.
Yep.
So we have three more questions, and Kaloyan want to ask a question as well. From Martijn, it's actually indeed a very long question. Let's see if we can manage it. Lately, we had a small argument about how to split a story. It was too big for one sprint. We had two possibilities: split into cleaning up technical debt and making the actual feature. And the other option is do a spike first, not merging anything, and from there doing all the work that is left. The argument was which option gives value. Some said the first, because both PBIs contain actual integrated, tested, and merged code. And some said the second, because a spike gives proper knowledge on how to continue instead of only solving technical debts first.
Good question. I don't have a lot of an opinion about it, because I think both approaches can bring value, and it really depends on the context of also the motivations of the development team, because they're also a stakeholder in this, right? So I would ask the team, because in both cases it will basically take 2 sprints to deliver the value, the feature, right? So the value that's delivered in scenario A is that you already improve the quality of the product in the first iteration. And the difference with situation B is that you don't deliver anything, because you make a spike and you don't merge it, right? So you basically start building and then you wait for the second sprint to deliver it. But both scenarios don't deliver value to the user. So in this case, as a product owner, I would leave it to the development team. I would tell them there's no difference for the end user or for the business. We respect your indication that we need to improve the quality, because the quality of the product should be in the hands of the development team. Of course, you should ask some critical questions, because sometimes we also there try to gold plate a bit too much. But in this scenario, I would leave it to the team, actually.
Okay. And then oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was wondering about that, because in scenario 1, you are delivering something. You are delivering the feature which can be used.
If I understood it correctly, we are cleaning up technical debt.
Yeah, so that would mean first sprint clean up technical debt, second sprint make the feature, or the alternative would be do a spike first and then release everything.
Maybe one question in between, but you probably did this, is, hey, can we slice the feature functionally so that we can do a little bit of technical debt and a little bit of value for the user in iteration 1, and a little bit of technical debt, a little bit of value for the user in iteration 2.
No.
That would be from a product development, product owner perspective, the best solution. But sometimes, that's not possible.
No, it was not possible in this case.
Yeah, I imagined already.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hey, for the sake of time, I've got 5 minutes left, and then I also need to grab some lunch. Jay, I think we have like 2 more questions, and someone raised his hand.
Yeah, already in the chat as well. What questions you usually ask to the team for them to be able to write a good user story?
What questions I ask? So the first question is, what are we trying to solve, right? And generally, as a product owner, often you bring that to the team, right? So you see from market data, user feedback, you see some stuff that's happening. And you come with a very high level problem that you think is worth solving. And then a follow-up question to the team is, what kind of solutions do we see that can best solve this problem? like with minimal cost and maximum value to the end user. From there, I would already really like to put the initiative on the team side and not on the product owner side. So you really come up with a clear why purpose for doing this. And then you basically shut up and you ask, okay, what kind of ideas do we have? I always have opinions. So also for me, it's still, after all those years, it's still difficult to shut up. But you really get better ideas when you give the team the space to come up, not only with the how, but also the what. Really leave that to the team, I would say. So then once you notice that the what is really clear, sometimes it's not clear, I give some feedback again on other insights from the market. And then I ask them again, okay, now that you know this, think again. And only when that is clear, then start switching to the how. And on the how part, I ask less questions, but I might ask a question, do we really need to make this new framework because it's a high effort? Or what alternatives do you see? Or okay, this means the feature will be late. We want to have this feature earlier. What kind of things can we do? These kind of things.
Right.
I think the last one, Zerian.
No, we have two.
All right.
Yeah. Oh no, I think this is the last one. Do we need a definition of ready? Some set of checklists that needs to be completed before moving into coming sprint.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about the definition of ready. Personally, I don't advise the definition of ready because it also doesn't inspire your team to move beyond the point that you need the definition of ready. So in my experience, when the definition of ready is there, we don't move beyond the point that we can even decide later in time during the sprint, as Eric just, I think it was Eric just explained. So the pitfall of the definition of ready is that it becomes some kind of bureaucratic thing that doesn't help the team anymore. So it can help the team, but it can also become a blocker for the team.
I completely agree with you, and I was wondering what your thoughts are about the definition of done.
On the other side, the definition of done, I'm a big fan of the definition of done because it makes, for also me as a product owner, transparent what we agreed upon. So whenever we have a discussion about quality versus the time it takes, for example, we can always take the definition of done. And then if it's part of the definition of done that we do that, then I can't reject, and my stakeholders also can't reject, because as an organization, together with the team, we agreed upon that for the continuation of the quality of the product, that we respect these items in the definition of done. So especially in managing your stakeholders, imagine that the stakeholders get grumpy, they say it takes too long. You can always use it as a reference, like, yeah, but we agreed on this. We do automated testing, right? And that takes some time, so we have to wait a little bit more. But that guarantees the quality of our product in the end.
Okay.
But again, it depends on how it's applied and how it's used in an organization, right? So it shouldn't be some kind of defense mechanism for a development team to not try to deliver something within the boundaries that are set by a product owner, right? So it's it should be especially the conversation between the product owner and the development team should be going in the right way. So it's always a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because basically I feel like the definition of done is a tool which doesn't really fit in the ideal we're looking for. And of course I use it myself too for the reasons you described, but if you think about it, in principle, it's actually the same as the definition of run. It's a piece of bureaucracy that gets in the way of collaboration.
So if you notice that it's really not necessary, that it doesn't help you manage your stakeholders and it slows you down more than it helps you, then I would be in favor of dropping it. Yeah. But in my experience, it helps more than it slows down. That's in my environment the case.
Yeah. And I think Frank also added a very good one. Definition of done is not a checklist. That's a very, very good one. And with that, I want to ask final question. Did any one of you put a question on the chat which I forgot? Because administration is not one of my best qualities.
Well, I think you did great, Serian. But Kalyan, did you have a question?
Well, I have two questions, but I think the first one is more important. Is Can we have the records of this session? Is the records will be posted somewhere?
Yes, we will share it on YouTube, and we will also share the link to YouTube on our LinkedIn channel.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, so the other questions, I think that it's going to be quite easy. It's about the other, the opinion of the rest of the group is when the team is working on, let's say, 2 or 3 products at the same time. Maybe those products are related in some stage. So do we use a separate backlogs for each product, or it's much better to use one single backlog for all of them? Which one, from your experience, is better approach?
Yeah, if you go back to Scrum, it would be a separate backlog because every product has its own product backlog. But then again, if it's the same team working on those multiple products, you might find it works better to merge them together in one product backlog. So it's a bit theory versus practice, I think. Yeah. Curious about the other participants, what your preference would be. But I would personally, in practice, I would, if it's the same team, I would still merge it into one backlog so that for the team there's optimal transparency in the priority of things. Because if they have 3 backlogs, then they have to start reasoning if something is on number 1 in backlog 1 and another thing is on number 1 in backlog 2, which of those 2 is actually the most important one, right? So if you put it in one product backlog, then it's always 100% clear to the team that the one on the top is actually the most important item.
So yeah, definitely it's the same team, the same product owner with actually exactly the same team, but just working on maybe 2 or 3 things in parallel, maybe different sprints. But
is there anyone who disagrees?
I do. Why do you have different products? How did you define your products? Maybe you need to redefine what your true product as a team or even organization is. And when you start doing that, you'll realize that you're not working on 3 products. You're only working on one larger product. And then you're just managing multiple stakeholders.
Yeah. Well, maybe the approach in general from the business perspective is that you have 3 different customers who are requiring 3 different.
No, but then it's on a different product. They don't require a different product. They just require different aspects of the same product. So really think about how you defined your product. I see this in a lot of big organizations. They define products by the team that's working on them. That's not a product.
Yeah.
Start as a business concept and then try to put it into IT or agile frameworks. What is a product?
Yes.
Start as a business.
Thanks, Frank. That's a really good addition. That's why also in the Product Owner Advanced course, there's specifically a chapter about what is a product, because it's good to be aware and do this check indeed. If we're talking about different products, check, are they really different products? Or is it actually one product that has a producer and a consumer that pays for it? So thanks, Frank, for the addition. Hey, we're going to close off now so that I can also grab some lunch. I hope you enjoyed both your lunch and this talk. And looking forward to see you again in any next editions. Thanks very much for being here.